Shabbat Shalom. I know that for many of you, like for me, the past months have perhaps involved a lot of counting. How many loo roll packs do I have left? How many jars of Marmite are left on the shelf at the shop? How many people are in the queue for the supermarket? It has started to feel more like Hanukkah than Pesach. Will the oil last throughout the lockdown? For many, these fears are very real. But I feel I have also spent time counting my blessings and counting what I have, feeling very blessed to have enough. Despite my feelings around scarcity and lack, I actually do have enough. I have plenty. And I can count the blessings of the marjoram and wild rocket seeds that I have just planted, my family far away but well and safe, and dear friends who have recovered from the virus after periods of sickness. I am very grateful. This time of year is indeed a time for counting. We count the days from Pesach to Shavuot, and this is known as the counting of the Omer. Yet instead of counting down to Shavuot, we count up, starting with day 1 and counting 49 days. I do think this is especially relevant to our times when we have no idea how long this lockdown will last, how long a family member or a friend might be sick, or how much longer we will be living in such a different reality. We can't count down, but we can count up. And I've seen wonderful ways that so many people are counting the days, with daily drawings, dances, or songs. It is important to mark the time when time feels so elusive. The biblical commandment to count the Omer appears later on in the book of Vayikra, Leviticus, in the portion of Emor, which we'll read in a few weeks' time. The verse reads, Usfartem lachem mimacharat ha-Shabbat, miyom havichem et Omer ha-Tnufa, sheva Shabbatot timimot tihiyena. You should count for yourself from the day after the Shabbat, from the day that you bring the Omer offering, 7 complete weeks you shall count. And it continues, Ad mimacharat ha-Shabbat ha-Shvi'it tisperu 50 yom, v'ikravtem mincha chadasha l'Adonai. You count 7 weeks, 49 days, but in fact a total of 50 days, counting Shavuot as well. Then you bring an offering of new grain to Hashem, to God. You should count for yourselves, it says, from the day after the Shabbat. You count 7 complete weeks. Each day, an offering an omer size of barley was brought at the temple in Jerusalem, marking the days between Pesach and Shavuot. And you count until the 7th week, a total of 50 days. Why does the verse tell us to count from the day after the Shabbat? We start counting, after all, on the 2nd day of Pesach, which may or may not be Shabbat. What is this Shabbat? The Kedushat Levi, Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Berdichev, points out that Pesach is referred to here as the Shabbat, referencing the Talmud in Menachot. The initial Shabbat, he says, is when God, like an artist, created the world and rested on the 7th day. But even though God created the world and great wonders, Lo chazar shum adam b'tshuva mima'asim halalu, he says. No one did teshuva or return from the great wonders that God performed. It wasn't until the exodus from Egypt, because then, nigmar briat ha'chayut v'hasichlut la'avod habareh. The livelihood and consciousness that was necessary to serve God was finally complete. This is why the verse tells us to count for us, usefartem lachem, because the creation of the world originally had nothing to do with our actions. We can't change the reality of the world. But the creation of aliveness and the world of consciousness necessary to serve and love God in our lives, this is up to us. We count not for ourselves, but the counting is rather dependent on us. The reality is as it is. People are sick and dying. Many have lost sources of income or have to put themselves at great risk in order to make ends meet. While the reality is very challenging, meaning-making and aliveness are possible, and that is our task. When we not only see the reality as it is, but allow it to move us, shape us, and shake us, when we see the wonders around us and the difficulties, and allow them to cause us to return, that is when we arrive at the second kind of Shabbat, the Shabbat that is Pesach. And from there we begin to build towards more wisdom, which is Shavuot, the receiving of the Torah. When we can live like this, it is a chance for every day to be meaningful. Not just another day in lockdown, but a day with real meaning, potential, and transformation. The Mishnah in Tractate Menachot teaches us about how they would harvest the barley for the Omer. It asks, how would they do this? And emissaries of the court of the Bet Din would emerge on the eve of the festival of Pesach and fashion the stalks of barley into sheaves while the stalks were still attached to the ground, so that it would be convenient to reap them. The residents of all the towns adjacent to the site of the harvest would assemble there, so that it would be harvested with great fanfare. Mechubar Lakarka tells us about these stalks. They were attached to the ground. They were still attached to the ground, and yet preparations were made already for the harvest. Can this be a time, then, in which we make each day meaningful while staying rooted to who we are, to our tradition, to our community, and while preparing for the great harvest? If this is a time of preparing, making meaning, reflecting, we are preparing to harvest with great fanfare the work we do during this time. The word used for fanfare is esek, to become busy with. Just as we become busy with words of Torah, la'asok b'divrei Torah, each day, we also become busy with the wisdom we will collect when the time of the harvest comes. Each day of the Omer has two different qualities associated with it. Today, Shabbat, is strength within strength, gevura shebegevura. The work of making every day meaningful, of preparing to harvest, is not easy. It requires a lot of strength and fortitude. It requires daily practices, meaning-making, and drawing on our resources. It requires community, as we read about in Menachot, mitkan sot, they would gather. It requires support and diligence and an acceptance of our reality before we are able to allow it in and accept the transformation possible. May this Shabbat be a chance for us to experience that transformation firsthand as we open to the wonders of the world around us and count the next day of the Omer. Shabbat Shalom.